Safety-wise, we have to be exceptionally careful, but there is a sting in the tail. Disposal of nuclear radioactive waste is not a lifetime job. It is a job for all generations to come. Radioactive waste doesn't sort of become harmless over a period of time. So that burden will have to be taken by the state. So we will be subsidizing nuclear power to a large extent in taking over that and looking after that. We might bury it under the seas and so on, but we are just storing future problems. So even nuclear power is a short-term gap until we begin to generate and make things from truly renewable sources which don't require this, okay? Still, the problem of course, global distribution of these things stays. We can begin by giving example, but we cannot dictate to other people what they will do. So the global forums, like the one climate change we had in France, and I think in 2020, we are thinking of hosting the global forum here, trying to get commitments, some soft and then slightly harder and then hard commitments from countries that they will adhere to these emission levels in their markets. And so the whole thing will begin to add up. Unfortunately, the Americans are not playing ball at the moment on that. They say, we can't be limited by other countries. We can do what we like, America first. And I remember those days, early 1980s, we were saying to the Americans, if you lower your air conditioning temperature by 2 degrees, we can accommodate the whole demand for these gases from the Chinese. How can you talk about us lowering our air conditioning? 2 degrees is nothing. But that's unfortunate. But I think it's only a question of time before many nice and decent American people will also see sense and in turn get their leaders to see sense. However, and of course, you will have seen that our country here has taken 2 steps which have been quite pivotal, quite pioneering. The first one was taken during the tenure of Gordon Brown as Chancellor. Finally, he agreed that the UK will give 0.7% of its GDP to development activities, including encouraging all these kinds of things. Because UN calculations after the limits to growth thing showed that if every rich country puts 0.7% of their GDP into these activities, we can begin to see the end of poverty globally. So we were fortunate to have Gordon who understood this, and it's now legislated. Of course, one of the discussions in the prime ministerial candidates is that whether to remove that and not think about it. So anyway, I hope not. I hope we can. They have begun to dig into it. They say security is part of development and this part of, so they have eaten half of it away. So it's not something which is sacrosanct, but we need to build that constituency to help that. The second thing which has happened because of the impending circumstances and because of our wish to hold the 2020 summit here is that we have become one of the first developed countries to commit to 0 carbon emissions by 2050, which might be late, but anyway, it is a hard commitment. Now it has to be followed through. What is required to deliver that? Development of appropriate technology, products, and so on and so forth, right? And that obviously will also bring the question of finance into these things. Finance which encourage these activities, very much like the SDGs. We might develop a framework where we say that any financing must show how much they will contribute to getting that target done in this country. If not, don't finance it. And happily, the Governor of the Bank of England and the other financial authorities are beginning to latch on to that and say to banks and others to price this risk into their lending models. This is one of the ways it will begin to change. Yeah. So hopefully, Other countries will be also encouraged to follow and do some things which also help the global effort. But at the end of all this, we come back to the limits to growth. Can we sustain this level of consumption for the 8 billion people of the world, or for the 10 billion people of the world in the next 20 years? If not, we have to see to change our lifestyles. One of the biggest contributors to this problem is the consumption of meat. As many of you who are economists will know, that as you become more developed, you eat more meat, and you consume more grasslands to produce meat. Meat is a very, very inefficient conversion of protein for consumption. There are other ways to do it by not eating meat. So meat eating habits, things like that will have to change across. Usage of cars, global travel, number of airline passengers all over the world multiplying and multiplying again, bigger and bigger airports coming up. We're taking a flight at the whim and say, okay, I'm going to Belgium today and I'm going to Amsterdam tomorrow and here and there, not realizing my contribution to the thing. So all those things will need to change. The time now has come for each person to make a contribution from their own lifestyle, and then from each person in their workplace or in their place where they are contributing to thinking, to think through these processes and then feed them into finance. And we see it is not without results. We see that day after day, different funds are announcing that we will not invest in fossil fuels. For example, the university endowments and so on, Norwegian Wealth Fund and so on. As more and more do that, people who are producing polluting products and technologies will not get access to finance. And therefore, there will be a spiraling effort to direct finance towards activities which will enhance this. It is a long road ahead. This is just a vision. But I'm glad that the UK is quite advanced in this thinking. Whether our companies will allow our government to deliver it, that's another question, but that is our job. So I think with that, I would like to conclude these remarks. This is how the sustainability paradigm has built up, imperative now, and now the challenge is for the world to deliver on that imperative, which will bring many, many benefits which we did not have before. Thank you very much. I don't know if we should take questions or go to tea and then come back to the next session. What is people's feeling? Are there any burning questions? Okay, everybody, yes, sorry. Alija, can you bring a mic here, please, in the front? Yeah, here in the front.
Thank you very much for your beautiful discussion. Actually, you have referred the Malthusian theory of population, and I have written a research paper on Malthusian theory of population in 1997. So one thing just I remembered it, so I thought I should not miss here. Please. I should share with you people. And secondly, you have told that need to change the lifestyle, because Quran also says to change the lifestyle, because Quran says the destruction prevalent in the world is the consequences of the human mischief. Zarul fasad fil barri wal bahri bima kasbatat nas. This is the, we can say, the message of meaning of this verse. So population, actually, many people, they have perceived that poverty is because of the excess population. Those who have read and those who are the economists, have studied economics, Malthusian population theory. But what I perceive that we cannot blame entirely population. There are some other issues also. And the issue which we have find, that is the mismanagement of resources or the wastage of resources. Even in this small program, I have seen in hall during the lunch time, one waiter was talking, these are the Muslim people and they are wasting the food. So I have seen that the people, they don't care it that. And I have just seen, 2 weeks before, I have Googled some data about the wastage of food. So I have found there are several countries, they are wasting the food. So I think the God has created everything in proportion. So how it could be mismatched? So there is a not mismatch. I think this is the misuse of the public resources, and because of that we are facing the problem. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. There are two ideas here. One is what we have called israf, which is not actually wastage. It is abuse. The inner meaning of israf is abuse. So part of it is wastage. Now this is very much part of the ethos of Islam, that israf is not permissible. And so you are right, that we have to think of even, am I leaving half my apple uneaten upstairs? From there to bigger things, all right? Or wasting, we know, for example, how much food is wasted in homes, which is bought and then not used and then thrown away, and so on, by supermarkets, by here, there, all kinds of things. The other one, which is also equally important, is called khilafah. Not khilafah in the sense of a caliph, but khilafah in the sense of stewardship of resources. Allah says, I have created you as stewards upon the earth, which means guard the resources. And what I think George Latham, who was talking in the morning, said, this is that use the resources of today in a way that you do not compromise the use of them by future generations. Use them mindfully. And this is, of course, stewardship. You are quite right, yes, of course. And this is what I mean by behavioral change. Behavioral change, disposable cultures. If you go and buy, say, a burger. First of all, the burger is made of things, let's leave that on one side. You have a box, and then he puts it in a bag, and then you put it in another bag. So how much are you wasting for just a small thing like that? And then you find the same bag and the same box on the street or in the dump or garbage cans. And if you think about it hard, you see, my God. Or just give you a closer example. We went to Hajj last year, right? Those of you who haven't been or who don't know Hajj, this is the annual pilgrimage. About 3 to 4 million people come. 2 million from outside, 2 million from inside the Saudi Arabia. Every sanctuary, every haram has got these banks of water and plastic cups. And I was making a calculation that between us, we were probably throwing away 10 to 15 million plastic cups a day in Hajj, which is the most sacred of the rituals, right? 15 million times 20 days, where is it going? Into a dump mountain, plastic mountain, or being dumped onto Thailand or Malaysia or wherever? These are the kind of things we need to think about. Whilst convenience is one thing, responsibility is another.
Evolution of sustainability through time. My question is, with your experience, if you were to cast an eye to the future, would you say that with the rise of nationalism and also with the apparent failings of the nation-state model, would it be perhaps a more innovative approach to think about human governance much more locally and much more communally, and therefore bring about sustainability to those new frameworks of governance, and thereby creating much more stronger links to the international institutions like the UN institutions?
This is an interesting question. Obviously, populism and nationalism will say that let us look after ourselves and let the others look after themselves. Why should we bother? Unfortunately, this is a big education exercise because they have to realize that if we cut our carbon emissions to even minus 20 and North Africa increases by 50%, we are where we are. So unless we work together to say that let us look at the global levels, all of us will be sunk. I admit that this is a big education exercise. It's not an easy thing, but that is the only way to go. And that's why I am quite keen to preserve even the shells of the UN organizations, which at least can make all these people sit around the table and say, look, this is the problem. Yes, Asaria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iqbal, for your comprehensive and interesting subject. Now I understand what is the responsibility of the finance. You discussed both of your lecture about the responsibility of the individual or the corporate. But this issue, the climate problem in future, is the responsibility of the government. The government of the world should sit down in United Nations or anywhere to make a global agreement. And if they have not done such this gathering, we will have in future a deep problem.
Yes, it is, of course, it's not the responsibility of the government, but it is the responsibility of the government if their people demand it. So what I'm saying is that if we demand it, that our government be positive on this. Can you imagine our Prime Minister coming back from the CO2 summit and say that we don't want to be part of it? And if we have 2-3 million people marching on the streets of London, they have to go back and say, sorry, we are going to join you. So it is a two-way process. Yeah, governments can deliver. Some of it has to be done by governments because you have to be fair in terms of the impact on different things. You have to understand the impact of different communities. For example, if you shut down oil factories here and there, then those communities, you have to find ways to accommodate that and so on. Countries in the Middle East, they are exclusively dependent on fossil fuels. So if you say no fossil fuels from tomorrow, we have a problem. But what is amazing is that if you go to those countries, the amount of power generated from solar power is close to zero, whereas solar power is available 24/7. The only country which has made decent progress is Morocco. Morocco has established now projects called Noor 1, Noor of course from light, Noor 1, Noor 2 and Noor 3 is under construction. These are solar power stations. When Noor 3 is finished, I think close to 60% of Morocco's power consumption will come from these 3 solar farms. This is quite an achievement. Of course, it has been funded by World Bank and all kinds of other things. And we have been arguing that we should be using our pension money to fund it because the payback is long-term, but then we want the money long-term anyway, which is pension money. So yes, I think it is a combination of things which has to be done. Can I take a last question from Azman? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Iqbal by Arif Zaman. I just wanted to, the two aspects of this question. The first is the international framework that you didn't explicitly talk about, but clearly is there, the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, does provide what is arguably the best attempt yet to get consensus around some of our global challenges. And I just wondered what your thoughts were. You've talked about several of the issues in relation to the goals, but of course SDG on gender, SDG 5, and there are others. That's one part of the question. The other part of the question was a few weeks ago I was in a room with the Islamic Development Bank during the UN Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. And it struck me that, you know, the Responsible Finance Summit could really help in bridging the dialogue between the people who are involved and know about the Sendai, the UN framework, the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction, that was agreed by governments in the same year as the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, the problem being that nobody's ever heard of them. The knowledge is very low, but they also provide, as you know, Iqbal, a framework for disaster risk reduction. And there is a real lack of linkage between these. And it's very interesting that the IDB, they come a bit late to the game, but they're getting there now. They're now developing a much clearer focus in this area. And it struck me that this may be an opportunity for responsible finance in this context.
I think you were not here in the morning. We were discussing that for 2 hours. The World Bank representative was here, and we were interrogating him on this. So we'll fill you up on that. On the first part, SDGs, yes. So if I remember correctly from our time at the World Bank NGO committee, we started to talk to the bank. He says, every project you do starts with a paragraph that our overarching goals is reduction of poverty in a sustainable way, blah, 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 whatever. This is like a mandatory preamble, and then you go and do what you like to do. So we said, this is not going to help us. Can you quantify what this project is actually going to do in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever? And they said, but we can't be so specific. I said, look, I was chairman. I said, look, this is what we want. We want simple people to see what you are doing. At that time, the IDA, which is the soft loan part of the World Bank, was going through replenishments, and people were questioning why we should replenish. I said, you need to explain yourself. What are you doing to get this replenishment grants? Ultimately, that discussion evolved into what came to be known as the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, and there were 8 of them. They were very simple, that by 2010 or 15 you will have half literacy and illiteracy and this and that. Very simple, straightforward goals. Of course, some were achieved, some were not. But every project from that on, if you look at the World Bank project, it had to put this down. That this project will increase school enrollment in Mali by X, Y, Z. So you could put your head on it. And before the close of the MDGs, discussion started, and that evolved into a much wider and comprehensive framework, which is now known as the SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. And now they are taking on a new meaning. As this imperative is building up, people are saying, yes, let's use that framework to frame this debate in international contexts and see how everybody is contributing to it or not. Every ministry now is obliged to put forward how this will help the SDGs. It's good to focus the minds on that. Some of it may be only box ticking, but much of it will also become real. So I think with that, I would like to close this session, and let's have a tea and then come back for the final session to now look at the nitty-gritty of what we are going to do in these terms today and then tomorrow. Thank you very much.